All right. So today, just to take you back a little bit into the two classes that we had on the building blocks of the teachings of the Buddha. On the first class, we talked about the concept of dukkha, or the existence of stress, and kind of the universal existence of stress. And that is one of the building blocks of his teachings. And the second one was anicca, or impermanence, the concept of one of the truths of, or one of the markers of existence being the fact that everything is impermanent, right? So we talked about that. The third piece is something called anatta. And before we go into that, there are a few things we need to understand. So in that context, I'm talking about I'm talking about this paticca samuppada, because this sets the context for anatta. This sets the context for the third building block of Buddha's teachings. And it's very important to take a look at this, because what we have to kind of understand from the teachings is, some of the teachings that Buddha shared, whether it is the fact of dukkha, or even whether it's the fact of anicca, some of these kind of already in some philosophies before, and in some parts of philosophies before, they already existed. Dukkha was something that Vedanta talked about as well, though they talk more about Ananda. But there are other philosophies that kind of talked a little bit about dukkha, also talked a little bit about impermanence or anicca. But literally, the piece that differentiates the teaching is the paticca samuppada, or what is kind of translated most commonly as dependent origination. And in the translation that I kind of refer to, it's more antecedental concurrence. Don't worry about it. It's a complicated set of words there. It just means that for everything that is happening, there is a cause. And when there is a cause, and there are a certain set of causes, then the effect is seen. So when the causes come together, the effect is seen, and then the causes come together and the effect is seen. That's how it moves. So it basically is talking about cause and effect, right? So we'll go into this. So I need to set a little bit more context, because it's important to understand where this came from, and also to understand where I am coming from, because there's just a lot of work out there. There is a lot of things that have been talked about, especially with respect to this. And there are a lot of interpretations of this teaching. And so I just want to set context before I start the translations and I start the explanation. So to start with, just at the time of the Buddha, and before it, and you would kind of see it even today to a large extent. There was this. If you look at the evolution of humanity, or evolution of humans, right? I think a good book would be *Sapiens* by Harari. Is a recent book in I think 2010 or 12 or something like that. So you can refer to that book, and kind of try to understand the context of the human kind of the human mind, really. But if you look at that whole context, um, in the early days of civilization, in the early days of man trying to form a community and form like whatever we have formed today, cities or villages or, you know, sets of people, so that he can protect himself and he can isolate himself and he can survive and thrive. There are a lot of things that a man observed in nature, and he devised some methods to overcome, right? So before the understanding of certain things, right, before the understanding of, maybe let's say, um, something happened and a flood came and took all the settlements away sometimes, or there was a wildfire, or there was um, some wild animals or whatever happened, and there are natural calamities, and it took away people's securities and took away people's possessions and stuff like that. What man started to kind of do was to try and postulate the existence of a superpower, right? So very important to understand some of these things. I want you to pay attention and also ask questions if some of this is not resonating or you're not understanding. I don't mind being interrupted at all, because it's very important to understand this whole context in which the teaching came and what differentiates it, and then we'll go into the teaching, right? So when say a flood came and took away people and took away possessions and stuff like that, or it was a fire and things like that, uh, the early man was unable to understand what was causing some of these things, right? What caused a flood and what caused this and what caused that. So what people started to do was to basically say, okay, there must be something, there must be some power there must be somebody greater than me who is doing this, because I am doing whatever I can and still I'm getting hit by nature, I'm getting hit by things that I'm not able to see. So to protect myself, I'm going to go and try and appeal to that person to keep me safe, right? So I'm going to go and ask or submit myself, right? So he says, okay, there is somebody that's more powerful, there is something that's just beyond my understanding here. So let me go and just submit myself to the person and say, okay, don't take away stuff that I have. I've been building this for a long time. These are all my possessions. This is my family, this is my city, this is my town, these are my friends, this is what I have, and I'm losing it and I don't have control over it. And so the concept of God came into existence, right? Out of our own mind. And we have to understand this. Out of our own thinking and our own inability to understand and grasp everything that is happening, a concept of God came into existence. Right? Earliest concepts of God were the concept of nature. Right? When you go really back in time, the gods were not human beings. The gods were nature. People would worship a tree. People would worship water. People would worship the elements, because the elements would just overcome them. Right? They could see that these elements are so powerful, and so they started worshiping the elements. The earliest form of God was the elements, and later, as man evolved, this crutch never went away, of saying, hey, I don't understand something. There must be something more powerful than me. There must be something that is more, something that I can't understand. And slowly, different religions formed, different forms of philosophy came up, different forms of thinking came up. But it was the same crutch. So some people said, hey, this whole thing is not working for me. Maybe it is Ganesha that should help me. And some other person said, hey, this is not working. Maybe it's Jesus, and maybe it's Allah, maybe it's somebody else. So this you started to form your own version of who you think would protect you, right? We don't go to Ganesha to thank what we have. We kind of do that because we say, okay, if we don't thank, maybe we'll not get what we have, right? But we thank God mostly in as a as like, okay, I guess I need to do this because I need to protect my house, right? But what we go for is to try and ask for protection. When we go to God, or when we go to this concept of something more powerful than ourselves, we basically go for saying, okay, you know what, let's try to form a deal, right? We ask for protection. We ask for, okay, can my family be protected? And can my city be protected? Can my country be protected? Can whatever your definition of mine, can that be protected? And how do I prolong it? How do I try to understand how to safeguard my interests? And so when you go to God, even today, most rituals are that. Most rituals are, how do I, how does something happen to me? How do I get a home? How do I get married? Or how do I get a child? Or how do I get this? How do I get more money? How do I get more success? How do I get this? So most of the rituals, even today, not just at the time of the Buddha, are basically driven towards self-aggrandizement, right? Trying to somehow satisfy yourself by saying, okay, I'll do this. I'll throw in a few coconuts, and hopefully in exchange, I'll have protection, right? So man, in the from the context of being unable to understand and grapple with the powers of nature, came up with a explanation that somebody is causing this, and as long as you're trying to appease that person, somehow things will kind of move on, right? So that is kind of the context of the formation of God within the social construct, and within societies. um, and then, but what happened is in the Paticca Samuppada, or in this teaching, during his meditations, Buddha found that really there is no external entity that needs to be more powerful. He found that the entire world that we create is actually within the mind. And that is the explanation today we're going to talk about. So he found that whatever is happening outside, there are causes. And when the causes come together, there is an effect. Right now, for us, it's pretty easy because we have seen science. There is something called the Age of Enlightenment. Science in the maybe in, I would say, 1200s to 1500s, in Europe and Britain, the emergence of science, emergence of today's modern science, the seeds of modern science, and man was able to kind of find this out. You strike a match, you get a fire. You know that there are three components to fire, and if one goes away, the fire goes away. So kind of man started to understand more, not just some few people, but more and more commonly, man started to understand that when there are causes, there is an effect, right? When you turn on the switch, the light comes on. So what man started to do was to try and use that law, it's the law of determinism or the law of cause and effect, um, to create solutions to life. The moment you understood that, hey, I could have a wheel, there was a cart, or there was a cycle. So man started producing products for daily convenience using the same technology of determinism, or the same concept that certain causes, when they come together, create a certain effect, right? So the emergence of science helped large scale people understand that, okay, there is a cause for this. When there is lightning, there is a cause for it. When there is flooding, there is a cause for it. The causes can be slightly different. In some cases, maybe climate change. In some cases, it may be just depression in the area. It may be a cyclone. It may be whatever. But right, there are causes. And what we do now is, we don't go when there is a warning of a flood um, in, say, in a coastal area. It's, you don't see people standing there and praying that the flood doesn't happen. You simply evacuate the place, and when the floods come down, you try and go back. You try and see what best you can do. Maybe you try to build a house differently. Maybe you try to build it away from there, and things like that. You do something, because now there is there's a little bit more understanding of what is happening, and there is more acceptance that whatever is happening, there may be a cause to it, and we need to find the cause. And as long as we find the cause and we are able to understand what causes it, either we can get rid of the causes, or we can get rid of the consequences by moving us away from that environment, right? So the emergence of science changed the perspective of humankind to be more rational, to be able to use the prefrontal cortex a little bit more, and to be able to say, okay, there are causes and there are effects, and we need to kind of try and go understand them, right? So what happened is, during the time of Buddha, when he went into when he taught the Paticca this is exactly what he talked about, the cause and effect. He said that when there is a certain cause, the effect is guaranteed, and the effect produces the next effect and the next effect. And if you want to stop the chain of events, then you need to kind of stop somewhere. You need to stop one of the causes. You need to stop one or multiple of the causes that are creating those events, right? So this kind of is the basis of the teaching. We'll go into the detailed teaching, because this is not about Buddha talking about how to light up a light lamp, a lamp, or how to create a bicycle. This is about how the mind works in the same context of cause and effect. Okay. So we'll go into that. There are a few translations, right? What happened, I think, between the time of the Buddha and the first 300 to 500 years, or maybe even 1,000 years after Buddha, there were, the people who were following the teachings of the Buddha kind of rapidly grew. Historically, it was, I think it was Ashoka who was the most popular, or who made Buddhism most popular, because he had this war and a moment of enlightenment during the war, where he really felt bad for all the people that were dying. And then he said, okay, I need to be more compassionate, and start working towards building better, more civilized places. And a lot of what he did are things that, we or several parts of the world still follow. So he first produced his edicts, or his constitution. And then, where, he started talking about peace, and started talking about not, trying to fight. But of course, he went to war even after that. That's different. But anyway, so so for the first 1,000 years, there's a lot of expansion of Buddhism from India. It went to Burma, went to Ceylon, went to East Asia, Thailand, Japan, China, all of the East Asian countries, Cambodia. Right, so it started spreading, and but it was mostly started spreading and started being retained with the monk folk, with mostly the monks who were trained in Buddhism, who were kind of reciting and documenting stuff. And until very, very recently, till the 1900s, there was mostly, a few places in Burma and a few places in Ceylon and maybe Japan, where, there is still, the Buddhist monks who were teaching and all of it. But there was one person called Rhys Davids from Britain who was posted in Ceylon, who got kind of interested through some accident. And he kind of translated Buddhism to Buddha's teachings to English. What happened with that is his translation has kind of become the de facto standard, because he was probably the first English translator of the teachings of the Buddha. And there are several translations later. I'm listing a few here who are fairly popular and who are mostly either from Sri Lanka or from the Western world, who have moved either to Burma or to Sri Lanka and spent years, or Thailand, and spent years on researching the teachings of the Buddha. But one of the things I have to kind of say is that though Rhys Davids did a phenomenal work in terms of being the first translator, because he made the whole teachings of the Buddha popular to the Western world and more accessible to people everywhere, people in India as well, people in other countries. However, some of his translations are a little, first time translating. So there is, there's a lot of things that are, that when even Sanskrit, that the translation is probably, off a little bit. Obviously, he was talking to monks who may not have understood English completely. So he was translating from Pali and they were trying to explain and he was trying to write in English. So there's always some miscommunication. For this translation, I'm using, and for most of the teachings of the Buddha, I use this person. It's named Bhante Punaji, also a monk from Sri Lanka. Of course, he taught in Malaysia, taught kind of all over the world. He passed away just a couple of years ago at kind of close to the age of 90. But he dedicated his life to trying to provide contextual translation for the teachings of the Buddha. And you can take a look whenever you're interested, if you're interested. I just want to set that context, because if you go and hit Paticcasamuppada, you may not see what I am saying now, right? So you may see completely different meanings to that. And so I just wanted to make sure I put it out there. And I also put it out there as to which translation I'm using. I've been reading this for, I think maybe, 4 or 5 years now. I do read several translations. I read the Pali as well. And then I try to read the word meanings. And then I try to pick a translation that I feel is closest to what it is supposed to mean. All right. So let's come to the Paticcasamuppada itself. All right. So at this point, let me take a minute and ask if there are any questions. Anybody wants to anybody has a question or a thought, wants to ask anything, because we'll now get into kind of what this is. Yeah, there's one question coming in.
I'm Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
I'm Sanya's sister. When you're talking about praying to God with in expecting something, that also sounds to me like as though we have an agenda when we pray for a God. Even in relationships, when we are talking to somebody, when we're interacting, there is some agenda.
Right.
So I'm just thinking that, is there an escape for that, or is it an...
Well, you need to survive, so you need to have an agenda. But the agenda should kind of not take over. If you're conscious that God does not exist, but you're praying because of your tradition, I think it's fine. But if you start believing in something that does not exist and going after it, then you may get misdirected, right? So it's up to your own process of thinking and process of where you feel comfortable, right? Some people may feel more comfortable if they felt that somebody else was taking care of them. Somebody may feel comfortable if they felt that their life was under their control. So it depends on where you are personally. So I would leave it to the person and his current state of thinking, because what happens around you is literally a reflection of your thinking and the state of your thinking. So um, what is this teaching is to try and explain that your world is actually created by you and your thinking and your observations, your reactions, your behaviors are what create your world, and that you can try and uh, re-architect them, or try and re-engineer them, or try and change your future by changing your present. That is what this teaching is talking about. So it depends on how you kind of want to take it, where you want to take it, and how you want to take it. But the teaching it's a very technical teaching. Typically the teachings of the Buddha are more technical. This is how the mind works. And okay, so that's where we leave it. And then it's left to the interpreter to say, okay, oh, this means how do I understand this? How do I implement it? And where all do I implement it? Right. So during the time of the Buddha, there were people, the whole point that Hindus could not tolerate Buddhism was that rituals started being not followed, right? And then it started taking power away from the priests, and it put power back into the common folk. And priests were losing power, and then it became very chaotic for their lives. And so, that was so it's like that. So if you believe some of this, or if you start understanding some of this, some of your life may change, right? And whether you're ready to accept that, whether you're, it's a personal growth thing. So I leave it to you to try to interpret it slowly, steadily, step by step, and see what, and you maybe implement something and see how it changes your life, and then see whether you're comfortable with it, and then move. So this is a lifelong process. But we generally are always selfish. Even when I talk about this, when I'm teaching, I still feel, this may be selfish for me as well. So we are always doing that. So we have to find ways to try and overcome that, and try to help, and try to be compassionate and stuff like that. We're always agenda driven. I am too. So, but we have to learn that it's also, the world is going to move even without us, and then we kind of start helping things around us. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. So I'll read this out. You don't need to remember this. I remember it because I've been reading this for a long time. So this is the Paticca Samuppada. Avidya Pachaya Sankhara, Sankhara Pachaya Vinyana, Vinyana Pachaya Namarupa, Namarupa Pachaya Salayatanan, Salayatana Pachaya Phassa, Phassa Pachaya Vedana, Vedana Pachaya Tanha, Tanha Pachaya Upadana, Upadana Pachaya Bhav, Bhav Pachaya Jati, Jati Pachaya Jara Maranan Shok Paridev Dukh Domanas Upayasa Sambhavanti Evametasa Dukha Khandasa Samudayo Hoti. So I'll kind of go directly into the translation. And there are, if you kind of see this, it says avidya, then pachaya sankhara, sankhara pachaya vinyana. So it's kind of, okay, this leads to that leads to the next one leads to that. And there is a whole bunch of one leading to another. And then eventually it says, in the last line, jati pachaya jara maranan shok. So this leads to your birth and old age and disease and sorrow and grief and lamentation and distress and exhaustion. And this is how stress is formed. So this is when I say dukkha, this is his Buddha's formula for how dukkha is formed. This is called the samudaya satya, or how the formation of stress happens within you. All right. So I'll just go quickly to the translation, and I've kind of changed this a little bit. So all the words that you saw in avidya, sankhara, vijnana, namarupa, all of them are coming here, one below the other. and then the English words of what they mean are by their side. Avidya means insentience, or you can almost kind of loosely translate it as ignorance. Sankhara, it's all your constructs. Vijnana is perception. Namarupa is name and form. Salayatana is sense. Phassa is cognition. Vedana, feelings and reaction, personalization, and me and the world, and birth and aging and death. Right? So this is what these words mean. All right. Now, let me take you to the context and try to explain what the teaching is. All right. So mentally, if you look at it, there are three aspects to anything that you see. Right? Let's take an example here, a very simple example. Let me see what I have in front of me. I have my phone in front of me. Right? So when I see a phone, I wanted to understand this. This is just physics. Okay, this is just a scientific understanding of what's happening here. So I see something. I see anything. I'll take the example of a phone. All right. So when I see it, when the eye sees it, there is first thing that happens is perception. Right. When I see it, the rays of light that hit the eye, and an image is formed. Right. This is how I'm wearing a specs, because some of my images are not formed properly, and we are able to scientifically deduce that it's not because of some problem. It's just because my eye is, there is something wrong with the lens in my eye. So I have an additional lens outside to see things properly. Right. So when I see something, an image is formed. Please understand this. What is an image? It's a set of colors. Right? So we perceive what we see when the image is formed. So when the image is formed, when there is light that is falling on an object, and the light reflects from an object, and it hits your eye, the eye picks it up, forms an image, and sends that to the brain. Right? This happens not just with the eye, please understand, happens with touch, happens with your tongue, happens with your nose and your ears. Whenever there is a change in the environment, there is a sensation that is created. And that is a eye sensation, or it's a smell sensation, or it's a sensation of sound, or it's a sensation of taste, or it's a sensation of touch. But these sensations are formed. And they come in, and the sense organs, which are responsible to interpret them, first create their image. When I'm saying eye image, there is also an ear image, there is also a nose image, there is also a taste image, and there is also a touch image. Right? So each of these nerves, whether it's auditory, olfactory, whatever the nerves that are there, they go back to the brain with that image. So this is perception. This is at very base level perception, that there is an object. First, that there is an object with some shape and some form and some size and those kind of things. The mental constructs and perception happens. And from that happens the naming of it. You say, okay, there is a name and a form, right? These are all the prior things, because how do you get a name and a form? If you were the first person to make a phone, and there was no phone else, then somebody has to, you have to give a name, and only that name, if you know a name, that name will be recalled. Right? Please understand, the nama rupa is the what is the name and form that already is resident within your brain. Right? When you have a set of data in your brain, constructs, which is all the past experiences of what you have seen and everything. And then, so if you see a new phone, if I see another phone tomorrow, I will not go and ask, what is this? Right? I'll say, okay, I've seen this before. My memory is saying this is, I've seen this phone. And then you'll recognize that because you've already seen it and you already classified it and you already have a dictionary for it. Now, if you see something that's completely different, then you'll wonder, hey, what is this called? What is this? Right? So that dictionary is not there. Sometimes if you have dictionary of things that are there, you will straight away recognize that. It's a name and form, right? So these are all what is in the background. Sankhara, Vinyana, Nama, Rupa. And then Salayatana, the sense experience. And then cognition. So cognition, sense experience is what is happening outside. And then cognition. What is cognition? Cognition is one step below or one step deeper than, one step superficial than perception. Perception is the deepest. And then cognition, where you are trying to understand. You try to understand the object. That is cognition. Trying to say, okay, now the object that I'm seeing is a phone, or the object that I'm seeing is a sofa. The object that I'm seeing is my enemy. The object that I'm seeing is my friend, is a human being, is a dog, right? So that is phasa, cognition. And then a feeling arises. If you see a phone, your feeling may be bhavatan. It may be, there is neither comfort nor discomfort. But if you're addicted to the phone, maybe you see comfort when you see the phone. Oh, where is my phone? Where's my phone? So you start looking for your phone. So, or if you see someone that you feel you don't like, after you recognize, the feeling may be, oh, I don't want to talk to this person because of the past, or hey, this is a friend, I want to talk to him, right? So feelings arise. When the feeling arises in you, you react to it. You create an emotional reaction to that object in front of you. There are three reactions that you can create. One is a reaction of wanting it. One is a reaction of not wanting it, is to move away from it. Or the other is a reaction of bhavatanha, just to let it be. I mean, if you just see something, every day you're seeing it in your house, you may be seeing your curtain or I don't know, your clothing or something in the kitchen or something, you just probably don't react. You don't react every time you say, oh my God, this curtain is beautiful. You may not do it. After a point, you just leave it there. You say, okay, it doesn't bother you, right? So, but if you see something that has a previous context of discomfort or of desire, then those contexts arise and you react. All right. Now, when you react, you create what is called personalization. When you react and you say, okay, this is my reaction. I don't like the person. I like the person. I want this. I don't want this. You create what is called a personality, right? And your personalization creates you, right? The moment you are created, you are subject to the insecurities of life, which is, aging and death and moving on. This is kind of what the Buddha talked about. All right. So perception, cognition, and affection. So I'm using these three words, all by Bhante Punnaji. Affection is how it affects, how you are affecting, how you are taking in what you see. So that is the subjective part, right? Everybody's affections are different to the things that they see. Maybe both of us see the phone, or both of us see as one person, and we both may react completely differently. You know, one person may know the person and not like him. The other person may completely not know the person. So your reactions are personal. But what you see is just perception. You just, whatever is happening around the world, you're seeing, or when I'm saying you're seeing, I'm using seeing as a metaphor for seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and thinking. Okay, so all the six salayatana, six sense experience, right? So you personalize it. You, whenever you see something, so in a very short summary, what this is trying to say, or what the Buddha talks about here, is that hey, there are constructs that you have already. There is a database of things that you have. The constructs can be just the dictionary, or it can also be connections. It can also be all your emotional stuff that's in the constructs. You have all of that constructs which are helping you perceive the world and give a name. Now, so that is your base. Now, when you see something, salayatana, when you see something, then that whole thing happens. The construct comes up, then the perception comes up, then the name comes up, then your sense experience comes up, then you cognize it, then you feel, a feeling is created, then an emotion is created over it, emotional reaction is created, and the reaction you personalize. You say, this is my reaction, this is something that is this is my house, this piece is my house, this is my friend, this is my whatever. You personalize what you see, and because you personalize, the world is created. When you personalize, who is it that's personalizing? That is you, right? You create yourself through the act of personalization, right? So what the Buddha is talking about here definitively is that he's saying that this whole construction that happens in the mind is impersonal, right? When the sankhara, vinyana, nama, rupa, salayatana, all of these are impersonal, and then the personalization and affection starts. Phassa, vedana, tanha, upadana, and bhava. You create your world. Because you create your world, you create yourself. Please understand, this is the reverse of what we think. We think we are born and we create the world. This is the precise reverse of our understanding, that I exist. And because I exist, this is the world around me. Now, the Buddha flips this on the head and said, because you call this as your context, that becomes your world. Whatever you personalize becomes your world. Please understand this. This for me took me years to try and even get the basic concept of this. This is the reverse of what is typically explained, or typically what we kind of tend to believe naturally, is that I am born, and then from that arises everything. And here what the Buddha is talking about is, because whatever you personalize, that becomes you. You don't exist. You are a product of all your personalizations. So whatever you say, this is my behavior, this is my likes, these are my dislikes. So what is the difference between, say, you and me, or another person and another person? Apart from the form, which may be different a little bit, each person looks a little different. What is really that person is just a set of his ideas about what he is. Literally, I may be identifying this as my house, you may be identifying something else as your house, as your friends, as my friends, as my beliefs, as my likes, as my dislikes. So we have a mental construct of ourselves. And those constructs are formed from our emotional reactions to the world, of our feelings to the world, of how we understand the world. So this construct that we have of everything that we, all the reactions that we have, create the world around us. So if you want to change, it's your construct that needs to change, is your understanding, is your personalization that needs to change, to say, oh, I like this, versus, you know, it exists and I exist. You can either be tight about an emotional reaction, or you can be much more calmer about an emotional reaction. So the more tightly you hold the world, the more the world affects you. The more loosely you hold the world, the less it affects you, right? It's like, the lotus on water. It's just floating on water. There are, I mean, actually the Buddha kind of talks about this as well. There are different levels of lotuses. There are some lotuses that come nicely above water. There are some that are just above water. There are some that are underwater, and there are some at the base. That is how much they get attached to the world. Some lotuses are able to come up and arise, and you see it's beautifully sitting gently on the water, and it's a few inches above water, right? You see a beautiful lotus flower, and there are some just unable to come up, still submerged or just rising above water. There are some they're half submerged in the water, and there are some at the bottom, right? This is exactly what it is, where how much you are able to live within the world and extricate yourself to be just as light as possible on the world, right? And you create heaviness by your emotional reactions to everything around you, right? So this is the teaching of the cycle of dependent origination. It says everything starts with the base of mental constructs, and then perception happens, and then you cognize what you see in the world. When you cognize it, you create your affection, or you create your personalization of your cognition. And when you personalize your cognition is when you are formed. The moment you are formed, even a simple thought of you, even that goes through aging and death. You have seen several thoughts that you had 10 years back, they've died, and some still are alive. So everything, so through those life forms you live, through every thought that you make, through every emotional reaction that you make. Each of those reactions have their own birth and death cycles. Each of those uh, um, interpretations that you have their own birth and death cycle. So you create one. The moment you do an action, it's like a domino, right? Then creates certain more actions, certain ripples everywhere. And then all of those ripples you kind of start seeing. And some of those you may like, you may not like, it may be good for you, it may not be good for you, whatever. But you're creating a series of actions around you by creating one action yourself, right? So this is that context, is that when you personalize some things, you create actions. And when you don't understand the impact of the actions, they come back. They become the world around you. And then you're starting, sometimes if it's too tight, you're in a cage. If it's nice and loose and you're holding on to the world in a soft manner, then it's far easier. You're free, right? Your freedom depends on how tightly you hold to your emotional reactions. Say, okay, this is me. And the more tighter you are, the more you suffer, because everything is subject to aging and death. There is no escape from it. The more tighter you are, the more things change, you suffer more. The more loosely you can hold things, the more things change, you can appreciate it, right? So that is the teaching of the Paticca Samuppada. And I'll try to kind of summarize that with an image here. As things fall, when I started, I said, if you should see this slide, this is the domino effect, right? So one leading to another. So as you touch, all of the dominoes fall. The moment you create an action, just there is a ripple effect. And that is this, sankhara, vinyana, nama, rupa, salayatanan, phassa, vedana, tanha, upadana bhava, jati jara marana. All of these, one after another, they just keep flowing. And how do you stop? Is like that, is to try and stop the fall by trying to understand. And, the, the, the techniques of the Buddha are all basically trying to stop the flow, trying to stop and to try and create a more harmonious existence, where, you don't feel that much stress around you, right? So there is no point of stopping here. Like, sorry, there's I. So stopping the flow is to basically stop anywhere here, right? So typically, because of the lives that we lead, we can think about stopping the flow with our feelings and emotional reactions and personalizations and the creation of ourselves on a particular nature, right? So those are the things that we can stop. But meditators can stop cognition, stopping sense experience. These are all what are called jhanas in the teachings of the Buddha. I mean, these are not something that are easy to achieve. It takes years of isolation and meditation to achieve. But you can stop cognition. You can stop sense experience. You can stop that whole. Those are the eight. There are 8 jhanas where you can actually stop all of these through a process of meditation, through the process of samatha and vipassana meditation, and overcome this whole becoming thing. And, becoming and then being subject to decay and subject to aging and death and suffering and stress related to that. So that is the teaching. That is all for the day. It's already an hour. I can take questions or we can start the practice.